Hi guys, just coming to you from my studio where the wind is blowing and there's a bit of a blizzard. There's a lot of noise because my husband is happily and nicely, kindly shoveling the snow for me because I have several deliveries arriving today for my new printer. So I can now create prints of my watercolor art on archival quality paper, 100% cotton. So it looks just like a watercolor painting because it's cold pressed watercolor paper. And the inks are archival as well, so that it should be guaranteed for more than 100 years. So it's been a really long time, a big long learning curve for me, trying to figure out how to um, create prints, hiring various graphic companies to create prints, and having difficulty with color accuracy and getting the type of paper and finish and just everything that I felt was, quality enough to sell. So I'm there now. So I'm also in the middle of getting my website going so that you can order prints. I would really be grateful because I desperately need your support as a struggling artist. I've worked now for 5 years without a lot of success, but I needed those years to learn a lot of skills and theory that I didn't know before. So one of the big learning curves for me was learning about all the colors, all the paints, all the pigments. And in the world of watercolor, the pigment matters absolutely the most. The most important thing is the pigment. Then you have companies, most companies use gum Arabic. That's how I say it. I don't know how you say it, but here I'll show this camera. So it's from a plant, and it allows the pigments to bind and create a paint. But then some companies have different things. They even use like animal glue or various things like old formulas from the ancient days, basically. But those companies create paints that have the most beautiful, beautiful application. Then there's the companies that use honey in addition to the gum Arabic. And so all the paints are different, all the pigments are different. And when you want to learn about color theory, well, for me, I wanted to learn how to mix all my colors, which I did. Of course, I'll still keep learning for the rest of my life, I'm sure. But, you don't need to start out with a ton of paints. So here in my interesting little arrangement of colors on the color wheel, I'm trying to show you on this kind of expanded circle on the outside the paints that you could buy that would cover every area of the color spectrum. And from those 8 paints, you could mix anything that you need. And I'm saying that because the quinacridone magenta, or the pink, is here. Pink is not something you can mix very well. It doesn't work. So if you use quinacridone magenta in your mixing set, then you can pretty much get everything. You can mix your own blacks, browns, grays, and so on. And so this is basically a chroma color chart. It isn't a mixing color chart, but the ideas are there. So what happens is, let's say this orangey red and this blue are complementary colors because they're across the wheel from each other. When you mix those two colors, you may get a perfect gray or you may not. So they may not be a completely neutralizing pair. So when I talk about a pair of complementary colors that neutralize each other, what I mean is that you could take quantities of each of those colors, mix them together, and come up with a beautiful, perfect gray. And even though some colors are complementary, sometimes they don't neutralize each other. So you have to learn that. So for instance, this dioxazine mauve does not create a perfect gray with the Hansa yellow deep. It's close, but sometimes you have to get a more green leaning yellow to make a perfect complement, to make a perfect gray. So those are things that you learn as you go, but I thought I would share a little of my journey so that it might make your journey a little bit easier. The colors in the middle are the secondary colors, and in a perfect world, you'd buy all of these colors, so that would be 16, because there's 8 in each circle, and then you'd have everything. But I don't think that's the ideal way to start. I think the ideal way to start is to get 6 or 8 colors and learn how to mix. And then as you go, if you want the exact hues that go around the color wheel from a scientific perspective, because I'm a nerd, I like that, you can do that. But this is just, information. So my 8 colors, the primary colors that I think I like the best. This is a Hansa Yellow Deep PY 97. And I buy that paint specifically from M. Graham. Then here we have the Scarlet Pyrrol, or Pyrrol. I'm really not sure how to say that. And I believe that version is from, that's from M. Graham as well. Then here we have Winsor Red, PR 254. That's obviously from Winsor & Newton because it has it in the name. And then here we have Quinacridone Magenta PR 122. One of my favorite makes of this is Core, and that's just spelled QOR, from Golden. But there's a number that are very pretty. So, you should probably, when you're researching these colors, look at a few people's swatches and figure out which one you like the best. Here is Dioxazine Mauve, PV 23. So the P stands for pigment, V for violet, and 23 is the number of the pigment. Here PR, that stands for pigment red. And then PO here is for pigment orange, PY is pigment yellow. You get the idea. Then going around the color wheel, the next one that I think is the best on this spot, on the chroma, the wheel, is Ultramarine Finest from Schminke. It's PB29. Now, almost all PB29s are very similar. The reason I picked this one is it has specific qualities that I like. The way they ground it makes it so it doesn't granulate very much. And granulation is modeling in the way that paint settles on the surface of the paper. So you get a variation in tones. And I don't like that when I paint a sky. So that's why I picked this specific paint. So even though you buy the same pigment from a lot of different companies, they behave differently. So you need to kind of do your research and figure out which one you like the best and what properties you appreciate in a paint. Here is PB15-3, which is phthalo green blue shade. And I think this one was M. Graham that I painted here. Winsor and Newton makes a Winsor blue green shade. Every company has this color. They just call it by different names. Some call it cyan, phthalocyanine blue, but you need to be careful about the names because there's phthalocyanine blue red shade right here. And you can see they're quite different. So this is the green shade and that is the red shade, and that is PB15:0. This is PB15:3. And then phthalocyanine green, and it's PG7. So those are my favorite 8. And then in the middle, we'll talk about the rest. The warm yellow is Indian Yellow, PY110, and this is from M. Graham. So my goal when I'm picking colors is the things I'm looking for are non-granulating for the most part. Let's see, non-granulating, transparent, so that I can glaze or layer the colors successfully. Staining, generally speaking, is a quality that I like because if I want to paint over top of it, I want that paint to stick to the paper and not move when I put another layer of paint on top. So let's see, what else? So non-granulating, transparent, staining, single pigment, yes, because when you want to mix your colors, you're going to be mixing a couple of colors, sometimes 2 or 3, and the more you mix, more pigments that you mix, the more likelihood that your colors are not going to be bright and cheerful and clean. Some people call it making mud. When you take these paints and you put them together and it looks muddy and opaque and it looks ugly. So that's something I want to avoid, and to do that, then I get single pigment paints as much as humanly possible. All right, so moving from the warm yellow past the orange to a warm red, we are at PR 255, Pyrrol Scarlet, or Pyrrol Scarlet. And you can see it's a very orangey red, then past the Winsor red, which is a more blue leaning red. Then we have an even more blue leaning red. This is PR 264, Permanent Alizarin Crimson. That's from M. Graham. And then past the magenta to the purple, or, well, violet, really. It's called quinacridone violet, and its pigment code is PV55. And I think I bought this one from Daniel Smith. I'm not quite sure. And then this dioxazine mauve, which I don't know if I told you that's from Old Holland. That's like my favorite color in the world, one of them. Anyway, these are all my favorite colors in the world. They're wonderful. Here we have PV15, which is ultramarine violet deep from M. Graham. This is a bit of an exception because it does granulate and it's semi-transparent, I think. It's kind of milky looking when you put water on it. Anyway, it's the hue that fits this area in the wheel. So past the ultramarine to the phthalocyanine blue red shade. PB15-0, past the phthalo blue-green shade toward a more green blue yet, which is PB16 or marine blue, and that one's from Holbein. They have changed their formulation to include 2 colors now, which breaks my heart. This is my absolute favorite color, and I've tried PB16 from a bunch of other companies, and they're not the same. They are not the same at all. So that makes me sad. So I bought a couple tubes of it. And then I'll have to, pick something else when they're all gone, and I'll cry, but that's okay. So then past the phthalo green to this. This is the only paint here that's a mixture of 2 pigments, and that's PY3 and PG7. So this paint here, and then sometimes I have a brighter lemon yellow in this spot on the wheel, which is PY3. But anyway, it's a light yellow that's cool, that's mixed with this green to create this really bright spring green is what I call it. And they call it Permanent Green Pale by M. Graham. So you'll notice that I talked about M. Graham quite a bit. And the reason for that is that they have a lot of single pigment colors, and they use honey in their paint. And the honey makes the paint re-wet. It means that it really never dries if you put it out on your palette. But the good part about that is that it's so easy to re-wet. And you can paint with it right away again. Just put a little tiny bit of water on it and away you go. And so I don't like having to scrub with a brush to try to get the paint up. So these paints, all of them behave quite well when you've had them in the palette and you try to re-wet them and use them. However, my favorite way to work with a color is straight from the tube with a little water added. Anyway, I'm hoping I haven't bored you to death. I mean, this took me years to figure out, and this is my very favorite work of figuring out colors. You know, it just, it was quite an interesting thing, and so beautiful, like how many colors there are, and so many to pick from, and then so much to learn about mixing and stuff. So I'm going to show you a couple of my earlier attempts. This is one version that I had the Hansa yellow light here. I split the yellow into two with the cool version and a warm version of Hansa Yellow Deep by M. Graham. Then here I have a transparent orange by Winsor and Newton. Here I have an earthy orangey red color from Old Holland. It's called Golden Baroque Red, and it has a single pigment PO65, and that is a wonderful color for your earthy, rusty type colors. Then here I had a Pyrrol Red Light from Core, and it's PR255, and then the problem I had was I couldn't find this. It seemed that they had it in a mix, and it wasn't readily available. So then I went to other solutions, which was, let me see. Yeah, Pyrrol Red Light here. Oh, that's from Core. So what did I do on here? Pyrrol Scarlet from Daniel Smith. So I found that one. So sometimes you just have to change your supplier because you can't find what you started out with. And then here for this point on the wheel, I have Pyrrol Rubin, which is PR264 from Holbein. Then I have Rose Madder Lake. It's a coral leaning pink color, beautiful, from Sinelli. Here's quinacridone magenta from Core again. Quinacridone violet from Winsor and Newton this time. Here's dioxazine mauve, Smaltz blue from Winsor and Newton, royal blue from Holbein, which is PB60. Here I had the Winsor blue red shade, PB15 from, Winsor and Newton, obviously. And then phthalo blue green shade here. I didn't say what company. Marine blue, which is from Holbein. And Schwenningen green deep from Old Holland, PG7, and then Permanent Green Pale, which again is the M Graham, and that's the PY3 and a PG7 mixed together to make that color. So, as you can see, over time I sort of changed, what I could get changed, and so on. So, here is an older yet version where I was kind of experimenting with more of the earthy colors, and I do not prefer this color, quinacridone gold, so my tastes change over time. And also I got a color, the Indian yellow, which I much prefer as my warm yellow. So a split primary is a warm and a cool of each primary color. So here are my two yellows. Here are my two yellows, but I didn't like this. So eventually, as money and time permitted, or whatever suppliers, or I could find out a single pigment color for that position on the wheel, then I changed over to that one. Okay, and then here I was using the Golden Baroque Red, the PO65, so it's an orange, that earthy color. And then the D is Pyrrol Red Light, PR255. E is Permanent Alizarin Crimson, PR177. This is from Core, and I learned later that PR177 is a pigment that's not entirely light fast. So I decided that needed to be replaced, and with time I found a replacement. So here I used Pyrrol Rubin from Holbein. And then, since then, I think, yes, I got the Permanent Alizarin Crimson from M. Graham. So, let's see, what did I do here? For the F position, it's Quinacridone Rose, PV19, and I think this is from Daniel Smith. And then over time, you see, I don't have it anymore, and the reason is I found a more vibrant version that I really liked. Here's Quinacridone Magenta, a favorite that has stood the test of time. And then down here we've got Winsor Newton Quinacridone Violet. Down here, the Dioxazine Mauve from Old Holland, and that hasn't changed. I've always loved that. A friend gave me some, and yeah, I was hooked. It's the most beautiful version I have found. And here is Smalt's Blue, or Smalt Dumont's Blue from Winsor Newton. It's PB15. Again, beautiful, gorgeous, but it's more blue than this version from Ultramarine Violet Deep from M. Graham, and yet they're the same pigment. See that? So I think this is a more accurate position on the wheel. However, it doesn't much matter if you prefer this one. All right, so the C here, that was cobalt blue. So I was trying to figure out the progression from the violets to the greens here. So I changed the positions of the colors and actually the composition of the colors here. So here I had the cobalt blue, PB28. Here I had Winsor Blue Red Shade, PB15, 0 I think, but I don't think that Winsor Newton actually says what it is. Here we have Core Phthalo Blue Green Shade, PB15-3. Here we have the Marine Blue from Holbein, PB16. Here we have Winsor Newton, Winsor Green Blue Shade, which is PG7. And it was an old tube, and it kind of granulated, and it's not supposed to. So I think maybe that's why it granulated, was just because of its age. Then here we've got the Permanent Green Pale from M. Graham. And then back to the Hansa Yellow Medium. So that's all the way around the wheel. So yeah, over time I changed my thoughts on which best fit that part on the wheel. And so some of the formative people that I've studied from are Bruce McAvoy. He has this is called an artist's color wheel, and it's based on the hue, angle, and chroma of mass tone pigments across a bunch of different paint brands. And he has a website called handprint.com, so just www.handprint.com. And he has a ton of information on different, paints, pigments, all things you would want to know if you're a nerdy type person. So this just really interests me on the position on the wheel of these paints and how they relate to each other. And then this is, I think, also from him talking about the different paints available at that time. Now, the website is out of date, and I don't know what's happened to Bruce, if he's changed his interest, if he's still alive, or what. So the website does not really get updated. Although Dr. Otto Cano has created a database of watercolor paints and pigments. And so if you're interested in something up to date, you could look at that. So then I mentioned Dr. Otto Cano and her thoughts on the color wheel and various colors and how they fit into that. And that was a lot of, I based a lot of my research on hers and then modified it based on what I could find. Because depending where you are in the world, certain manufacturers are hard to come by. So you try to work with what you can get. So this is just an example of how I categorize my paints to help me learn about them, to learn their qualities, how they behave, and to have a quick, at a glance way to decide when I'm going to create a painting, and I can decide which paints to pick from. So this is just what I do. I know that my camera on my cell phone is a little blue leaning, so it's not a perfect capture of color, but just thought I'd show you this quick, and then as I get new paints, I'll try them out here and compare them with various other ones that I have. And sometimes I just get a dot from someone, or I get a half a pan of something. And those are good ways if you want to trade dot colors with someone so that you can see what the paint is like before you buy a whole tube. Because sometimes you're spending more than $30 for a tube of paint. And if it's not exactly what you were looking for, that can be a great disappointment. I'm in Canada, so when I talk about colors, prices, that's what I'm talking about. It's Canadian. So we're going from yellow on the wheel, going into the earthy, orangey colors, and then into the reds here. And then I included the browns here. So some of these look really bad, but you know, that also is a learning process. You learn which colors can handle certain amounts of water and which ones can't. If you put too much water, you're going to have problems with that paint, right? So what I do is I sort of make a little legend for myself. This means I have a tube of that paint. This means that I just had a dot on a dot card to try. That means I have a half pan of that. And so it helps me to find the things that I have. And also, this is how I cheaply try to see if I really need a color or I don't, by getting a dot card and trying it. And then the backs are usually for just comparisons of a few. Usually the front is my more, you know, proper. And then on the back, I just put, oh, I got a new color. Oh, I want to see, for instance, here, I wanted to see what the ultramarine pink from Roman Schmal looked like. And then I wanted to compare it to some, well, I think I got dioxazine violet from Roman Schmal. And it's got a pigment called PV37. And I wanted to see how that compared to PV23. So I have two PV23s here. I've got one from Old Holland, and then the dioxazine purple from M. Graham. Yeah, so it's so fun to see how the same pigment looks so different depending on the maker. And here we go, bunch of other colors. Now these colors, most of them are not my favorites because you can see granulation. That's what I mean when I talk about granulation. There's a lot of texture. But then for certain things, texture's really good. So you do pick these colors for that quality occasionally, perhaps if you're painting sand or rocks or, you know, buildings made of sandstone or cement, you know, different things like that. Sometimes wood, sometimes, yeah. And then some of them have sparkle. Those are not colors that I really love, but this is a red fuchsite genuine from Daniel Smith. Anyway, oops. Can you see? And then I'm just really specific on, for instance, the shade of indigo that I like. Here are 3 shades of indigo, 3 different compositions. And my favorite is Winsor and Newton because it has a more blue-leaning tone. Yeah. Okay, here's some of the more granulating greens, the PG18s, PG26s, PG36s, PG50, PV28, PV74, and so on. Okay, here's blues now going into the green blues. And sometimes you'll see that I swatch a color, but then I swatch it again. So I try to go from really dark to light in my swatches. But sometimes I think I just get them too dark and I want to see what it looks like in a light wash. So sometimes I'll do that so I can see. Because when you're painting a sky, you're going from the deep blue up top to a really light blue down at the horizon. So you know, there's a lot of different ways in which you want to see if that one color can work for whether it's really dark or whether it's really diluted. Okay, let's see here. We've got a bunch of greens and something I discovered, which kind of late in my journey, is this pigment PG36. And that one is called Bamboo Green from Holbein. That's Phthalo Green Yellow Shade from Daniel Smith. And this one is Winsor Green Yellow Shade from Winsor Newton. And then here's a PG17, which is Chromium Green Oxide from Roman Schmal. And I would have to say that a very favorite that I discovered fairly recently is this Cobalt Green Deep with PG26, because when you're making foliage and things, there's, you know, a lot of use for a granulating color. And then I can't live without my Pyrrol Green, which is actually a black pigment. Pigment Black 31. And my favorite is from Winsor Newton. So you can see here's the Daniel Smith version, and they're pretty close. They're not identical, but they're close. Then here we've got some titanium white, some interference silver, some iridescent moonstone, some gray of gray from Holbein. This is Davies Gray from Winsor Newton, probably my least favorite color in the world. I do not like that one. Here's Titan Buff from Core, or Buff Titanium from Daniel Smith, and those are just a white pigment that has a slight tan leaning to it. An Interference Gold from Daniel Smith. And then again, the Payne's Gray, because the tone of the color matters to me very much. And my very favorite is from Winsor Newton, because again, it's got a nice blue undertone. And then blacks are something I usually mix, but there's an exception. The exception is if you want granulation. So if you want granulation, you would probably like Lunar Black. Then there are some others like Bloodstone Genuine, which is a warm black, and it granulates. And then, but this pigment, it's an iron oxide, and you can actually take a magnet, and in a wash on your paper, you can make magnetic fields. Isn't that cool? You can like move the pigment around with the magnet, and that's a PBK 11. So this is Lamp Black. It's PBK 6, and usually when people will say, they get snobby and they say you shouldn't use black when you paint with watercolor. And for the most part, I agree. There are times when it comes in handy, but mostly you should mix your black or your darks from the colors that are actually in your painting. But this color is an exception because I can use it really dilute to make a gray piece of driftwood, or darker to make something else that has a granulation in it. So, anyway, those are some of my thoughts on my color journey. One thing that is difficult for me to get in Canada, basically I buy them from Europe, because it's a European company. It's Old Holland Watercolors. And this is the company that uses some really funky additions to the gum Arabic. But look at that. They know how to make a paint that has the most beautiful transitions. I have to say, this is the best company that I know of for making just gorgeous, easy washes that don't have anything wrong with them. It's hard to believe because that's a hard thing in watercolor. So included as one of my very favorites that's never changed is the Dioxazine Mauve, the PV23. Absolutely wonderful. This color is a beautiful rusty orange. That's the Golden Baroque Red, and this is the only company in the world that I know of that uses this pigment. And then look at the beautiful transparent oxide Red Lake. Oh my, it's all beautiful. The one odd thing about them is that they make a lot of mixes that are like 3 or 4 pigments. So if you're buying those, do not use them for mixing. You just use that paint by itself, because if you mix it with something else, you're going to have a mess. So that's something to look for when you buy from the brand. But do your research. And this Blue Lake is an interesting shade. It's a little bit red leaning, but I find it one of the perfect colors for water and sky up here in the the northwest of Ontario. And it's pigment PB15-2. So this is one of my very favorites. And then here we have Schwenningen Blue, which is basically phthalo blue-green shade because it's PB15-3. Another favorite. Anyway, I hope I haven't bored you to tears. And if you have questions, let me know. Thoughts, let me know. Anyway, it was fun talking about colors, because I think that's probably one of the best things about painting is just color. I love color. Okay, take care. Talk to you next time, and thanks for your time.